Hello everyone, and today we are going to be doing a deck tech for Thalia in this funny frog. He is a first strike death touch. You can play an additional land on your turn. Your creatures and non-basics our opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. And whenever Thalia and this funny frog attack, sacrifice a creature or land and then draw a card. So we're going to be doing just some good old-fashioned Abzan lands and some tokens with it. So why play this Thalia and the Frog? First Strike Death Touch basically makes it unblockable, and it's the worst thing to attack into because whatever is blocking it is dead, and whatever is being blocked by it is dead while it lives. It's easy ramp from multiple lands per turn. That's a big part of this deck. It's going to punish our opponents for their mana base. So basically, when our opponents decide to spend a lot of money on having fancy shocks and fetches and all that, they get punished for it. And also their creatures enter tapped, which is great. We got great card draw because whenever we attack, we just get rid of a creature or land, which is going to be a token or a land we want in the grave anyway, and we're just going to draw a card. And then, since we're going to have a lot of ways to play lands from our grave, it just fuels itself, and it's a real hassle to deal with. So some vulnerabilities, graveyard exile. That sucks. It's going to be a really big factor in it because we like having cards in our grave. ETB triggers being shut down. That's mainly how land decks win, is like through fun triggers, and Elish Norn and cards like that. Hushbringer will stop that. Torpor Orb effects. Dead on board commander. Thalia is so good, and the Gitrog are so good together that they're just going to be killed like right away. They just offer too much value, even just as an attacker and blocker. They're just so strong. And nukes to kill our tokens. Tokens are pretty much the primary way we win this, and we make a good amount through the deck. So the game plan. We don't need Thalia and the Frog, but they help a lot just because they let us play an extra land. They're a great blocker, and they give us card draw. So we're going to play a lot of lands. We're going to hard ramp with them. We're going to get a lot of tokens to swing and attack. We're going to outvalue our opponents because we're going to have so much mana and so many cards. And then playing lands is a big part of this deck from the grave. We're going to keep funneling through and getting value from them. So here's a fun combo I decided to put in the deck. It requires Dread Presence to be on the board. When he enters the battlefield, you pick one of the two, draw a card and lose a life, or he deals 2 damage to any target and you gain 2 life. That's whenever a swamp enters. So what we can do is we can play Scapeshift and get up Urborg to make all of our things swamps, so we can just straight up hurt someone for a lot or just potentially kill someone. Even without the combo, he's in the deck because he's good. We have a lot of swamps in this deck. We got a lot of just general lands. Urborg helps him out. And we like drawing cards and draining and gaining. Let's go to Planeswalkers. Nissa of the Shadowed Baw? I don't know, guys. Anyway, she's a 4-mana, 4-loyalty Planeswalker. Whenever a land enters battlefield under our control, you put a loyalty counter on her, so she gets pretty big pretty quick. We can untap a land, make it a 3/3 with haste and menace until end of turn. But more importantly, we can minus her and put a creature card with CMC less than or equal to the number of lands we control onto the battlefield from our hand or graveyard with 2 Bowman counters on it. So if any of our utility creatures die, or if we just want to cheese something into play for free, and this is great. We also have Renin 7, another really cool card. Straight up just 5 mana for 5 loyalty Planeswalker. Historically, Planeswalkers with 4 abilities are usually very, very good. So Renin 7 is great. Reveal the top 4 cards of our deck, put all lands into our hand, and the rest in our graveyard. That's fine either way. Put any number of lands from our hand onto the battlefield tapped. Great, -3. We just make a huge tree folk that can block. And then if we ult it, we just get a Praetor's Council, which is return all permanent cards from our graveyard to our hand, and we just get no max hand size. We're mainly using it for the really the plus and the -3 effect. But if we can get that -8, oh boy, that'd be pretty cool. Let's go to creatures. Ancient Greedmorn is probably one of the best creatures for lands. He's just a straight up 6 mana 5/7 with reach. Just play lands from our graveyard, and then he's a Panharmonicon for lands. That's how we make most of our tokens. We win the game by playing lands. So Ancient Greedmorn just straight up lets us play him from our grave and doubles him up. Ashaya is really cool because she is a big funny elemental, and then whenever, basically our non-tokens are forests, so whenever a non-token enters the battlefield, we get landfall triggers, which is great. Augur of Autumn is cool because we can play the top card of our library sometimes, and if we have Coven, and if it's just no Coven, we just get to play lands from the top of our deck. A kind of worse version of Oracle Multiplier, but we'll get there in a little bit. AOZ is really great, 7 mana 5/5, but he's going to end about, we're going to make a ton of 0/1 plants, and then whenever a land enters, we're going to put a 1/1 counter on all of our plants. Sure, they start as 0/1s, which are just good blockers, worst case, but like, we literally play like a land, and now we got a ton of, like, let's just look at on face value. Face value AOZ, you pay 7 mana, you get 8 bodies on the board, and then you play a land, which is what the deck does, and then you put a 1/1 counter on each plant. So like, turn 8, you play them, right? Now you have a 5/5 for 7 mana, and then you play land, and now you have, what, 7 1/2s that only get bigger and bigger. Really cool. Also, I just learned that he was in Commander Legends. Just straight up didn't know that. We got Azusa, played 2 additional lands, more landfall deck, we like to see it. Braids is kind of fun. At the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice an artifact, creature, enchantment, land, or planeswalker. Hint, hint, we're probably going to do creatures and lands. If you do, each opponent may sacrifice a permanent that shares a card type with it. For each opponent who doesn't, that player loses 2 life and you draw a card. So it's cool because we can get rid of our own lands, and that's not really a big deal for us, but that can be a really big deal for our opponents. Because they don't want to lose their land, but we don't mind because we can just play them again later. And like, with cards like Azusa, we can play multiple of them per turn. Yeah, so Braids just straight up punishes our opponents for being selfish and not wanting to get rid of their lands. Dryad of the Elysian Grove, pretty cool. He basically makes all of our lands tap for whatever we want, and we can play an additional land on our turn. And also, he's kind of thick as a 2/4 blocker. Elvish Reclaimer is kind of cool. Is a 1 mana 1/2. If 3 or more lands are in our graveyard, it's now a 1 mana 3/4, and then we can pay 2 mana, tap it, get rid of a land, and search our deck for just any land and put it right on the battlefield tapped. So that can be kind of fun with stuff later. Amaria is pretty good, 4 mana flying 3/3, but whenever a land enters the battlefield, we make a bird with flying, which is really good because now those tokens, it's just like, again, like we play a lot of lands, and she gives, whenever a land enters, we get a 1/1 with evasion. I like it. Esper Sentinel, I just like putting Esper Sentinel in decks. I think it's good. It's a great tax piece. No one really wants to deal with it. And it's good card draw. And again, like we play a lot of lands, but we have to have ways to fuel getting those lands. Next is Green Sleeves, Mara Sorcerer. He is a star 5/5, or, stars or power or toughness. He's got pro planeswalkers and wizards. That's kind of fun. And then whenever a land enters, just make a 3/3 Badger. Sounds good to me. Knight of the Reliquary, love to put it in cards or decks like when you can, because white isn't really known for landfall, but he gets +1/+1, or she gets +1/+1, I don't know, for each land card in our graveyard. Already pretty good. That's a thick 3 mana guy. And then we can sacrifice a forest or a plains and search our deck for, again, just a land card and put it on the battlefield. Not tap, just straight up on the battlefield, and then we shuffle. Really, really good. Lotus Cobra, you know him, you love him. If you play against him, you hate him, but you still know him. Whenever a land enters the battlefield, you get a colorless, or not a colorless, you get a mana of any color. So really good value for just like playing lands, basically doubles them up for a turn. Then we got Maja, not even gonna, Breaded Guard Protector, sounds good to me. She's just straight up a lord, and then whenever a land enters the battlefield, we essentially make a 2/2. I like it. Then we got Oracle, 4 mana 2/2, play with the top card of your deck revealed, and you can play 2 lands per turn, and you can play from the top of our deck. Really good. Again, just playing an additional land is so good. Rampaging Ballast, what an iconic landfall. 6 mana 6/6 trample, already beats the vanilla. Whenever a land enters, just straight up get a 4/4. How can you beat it? Ramanump Excavator, 3 mana 2/3, play lands from our grave. Sounds good to me. Scoot Swarm, God, Scoot Swarm, what a card. 3 mana 1/1, what a bad rate, come on. But then whenever a land enters, you either just make a 1/1 green insect, which is kind of like Scoot Swarm, or if you have 6 or more lands, you just get another Scoot Swarm, which is really cool because you play a land, then you have 2 Scoot Swarms, and then you play another land, and then you have 4, and then you have 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, goes nuts, Sun Titan is fun because when he enters the battlefield, you may turn target permanent card with mana value 3 or less. Hint, hint, lands have a mana value of 0, so he just can straight up reanimate lands, and a lot of the guys we have are pretty tiny, like they're usually 3 or less, so he also gets back creatures if we need. Sylvan Safekeeper, sacrifice a land, target creature you control gains Shroud. Really good for 2 reasons. 1, just straight up protects our commander. 2, gets rid of lands, puts him in the graveyard. Love to see it. We want him in there anyway sometimes just so we can play him again later. We have the Gitrog monster right here. How can you hate that art? He's so sad. What a sad guy. Anyway, he's a 5-mana Death Toucher, 6/6, which is a great rate. At the beginning of our upkeep, sacrifice a land unless if we can blend. At the beginning of our upkeep, sacrifice him unless we sacrifice a land. That's fine anyway. You may play an additional land on each of our turns, and then whenever one or more land cards are put into your graveyard from anywhere, draw a card. So basically, at the start of our turn, just straight up just draw an extra card, which is great. And then we just play the lands from our graveyard later. And that also works. Again, the big thing is whenever one or more land cards are put into your graveyard from anywhere, so if they get milled or like whatever, we sacrifice them, we discard them, whatever. We draw cards off of them. Tireless Provisioner, honestly a mistake of a Magic card. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under control, we make a food or a treasure. Guarantee you it's going to be a treasure. He's basically Lotus Cobra, but the mana sticks around. Tireless Tracker, whenever a land enters the battlefield, investigate, that means you make a clue. And then when you sacrifice a clue, put a 1/1 counter on it. He's good because he's good card draw and he makes himself bigger. And again, he's just another fun landfall thing. Titania, Protector of Argoth. 5/3 for 5 mana. When it enters the battlefield, return target land card from our grave to the battlefield. Sounds good to me. And then whenever a land is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, make a 5/3. Like, a 5/3? Come on. Alright, now let's go to the final creature. It's a big fun flip. So, Titania, Voice of Gaia. She's a 3 mana 3/4 with Reach, which is already stupid. And then whenever one or more land cards are put into your graveyard from anywhere, gain 2 life. Like the sound of that already. And then at the beginning of our upkeep, if there are 4 more lands in our graveyard and you own both this card and a land named Argoth, meld them for free. And Argoth just enters tapped unless you have a legendary green creature, and taps for a green, and you can make a bear and mill, so that's kind of fun. But if you put them together, you get Titania Gaia's Incarnate, a Vigilance, Reach, Trample, Haste, Power, and Toughness equal to the number of lands you control, and then when it enters, return all lands from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. If that's not keyword soup enough, you can also pay 4 mana to animate a land, put 4 1/1 counters on it, and it's still a land. It makes me run out of breath just saying all that. That's how crazy that card is. Let's go to Sorceries. Agadeem's Awakening is also a land sometimes, but you can also return from your graveyard to the battlefield any number of target creatures that have a different converted mana cost of X or less. So it's a big reanimation spell from our graveyard, or it's just a land that taps for a black. We have Awaken the Woods, which is really cool because we pay green and then an X, and you basically you get like a ton of tokens, but more importantly that says get X landfall triggers, which is crazy. And then there's still lands, so just use them next turn. Valor Guide Recovery is just a regrowth kind of, but it's also a land when we need it. Cultivate and Kodamas, you just get 2 lands, 1 in your hand, 1 to the field. It's good ramp, and you don't miss land drops. And then Farewell to get rid of anything we don't like. If we don't like artifacts, creatures, enchantments, they're gone. Get them out of here. We don't really want to get rid of graves, but sometimes you got to do what you got to do. Light from the Loam is fun. Return up to 3 target land cards from your graveyard to your hand. Sounds good to me. And then we can dredge 3 it, which means if you would draw a card instead, you can put 3 cards from the top of your deck into your grave and then return this card to your hand. Right? You don't have to do that. You can just draw a card, but we don't really mind having cards in the graveyard because we can just play them anyways or get them back somehow. So it's fine. Nature's Lore, 2 mana, search your deck for a forest card. Not a basic, just a forest card, so that's going to hit your shocks and your triumphs. And then just put that card onto the battlefield. If it enters untapped, it enters untapped. If it enters tapped, it enters tapped. But again, it just gets any of our forests. Ondu Inversion, it's a big nuke, but it's also a land that is a nuke, so it's kind of hard to not run. Splendid Reclamation, 4 mana, return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. That's just a Sunday special, let's be honest. Titania's Command is a new card, and I was hesitant about putting it in, but here's my thought process with it. For 6 mana, you choose 2. You exile target player's graveyard, and you gain 1 life for each card exiled this way, which is really good. Search your deck for 2 land cards and put them in the battlefield tapped. Just straight up 2 land cards. We'll talk about that later. You make 2 bears, or you put 2 1/1 counters on each creature you control. Now, the way I would run this, right, is I would get 2 land cards and then put 2 1/1 counters on each creature we control, right? Because the main point of this deck is to get a lot of tokens and beat down with them and play a lot of lands. So that kind of does both at the same time. but I also like it because it gets rid of someone's graveyard permanently, and you just gain a ton of life doing so. You can also make 2 blockers if you're in a, like, again, like, any combination of this is good. Like, even just 6 mana for 2 4/4s, because it's 6 mana for 8 power is pretty good. But that's fun. Torment of Hailfire, it's a fun win condition just because since we're gonna get a lot of mana, because we're gonna get a lot of lands, X is going to be a lot, and it can just straight up kill people. And then the final sorcery is Toxic Deluge. It's just a good nuke. It just gets rid of a lot of creatures, gets rid of Eldrazi Titans if you really want to pay a lot. But it's really good. Instance, Anguished Unmaking, gets rid of something you don't like forever. Sounds really good. Assassin's Trophy, it gets rid of anything you don't like, but they can get a land. It's really not that big of a deal, but like, again, I would say it with like Beast Within and Generous Gift, like that land or whatever they're getting, I can guarantee you it's not nearly as bad as whatever you're getting rid of. Constant Mists, I think is very cool because it has buyback, sacrifice a land, and then it just fogs. Creatures deal no combat damage this turn. So it's really cool because someone goes to attack you, and you decide you don't like that. You just cast it, you don't take any damage, and you get rid of a land in the process, which we'll just play next turn. Crop Rotation, as an additional cost, get rid of a land, search your deck for a land, put that card on the battlefield. Sounds really good, right? Because it is really good. Imagine like this. The worst case scenario I imagine this card in is turn 1, you play a forest untapped, tap it, tap the forest, sacrifice that forest, and then just get a Triumph or a fetch land or get whatever you want, right? Like, it's great. Or later, you're like, I think I'd like to have an herb org, or maybe like a Field of the Dead. That's a funny spoiler for later. But again, it just helps us later on, late game or early game. Very cool. Hagra Mauling, 4 mana to just kill a creature, and sometimes it can be 3. That card sucks, but it's also a land, so take those. Mythos of the Nethroi, I just like it in Abzan decks just because it's just pay 1 of each and then get rid of anything, get rid of a non-land. It's just a good card. Final 2 instance, Realms Uncharted. It's basically Fact or Fiction, but for lands. Now the cool thing is since we play lands from our graveyard frequently, we really don't care what pile they pick. It's like a lose-lose for our opponent. And we just get to essentially hard tutor 4 lands for 3 mana at instant speed. And then Swords to Plowshares, just get rid of something you don't like forever. Like, they can gain life, that's not that big of a deal. Let's go to Artifacts. Arcane Signet, it's just ramp, that's all really it is. But now Conduit of World and Crucible of World are really, really good because we can play land cards from our graveyard. We really, really like that because it lets us double up on our fetches, it lets us double up on, basically we're never going to miss land drops when these are on the field because we have a lot of lands that just sacrifice themselves. But Conduit of World is cool because we can choose target non-land permanent in our graveyard, and we can cast it if we really need to. If like, we're really in a pinch, we can cast a non-land permanent card from our graveyard. It won't let us cast anything else that turn, but again, if we're really in a pinch, that's fine. But the big benefit is it just straight up lets us play lands from our grave. Horn of Greed, whenever any player plays a land, that player draws a card. Now, it's bad because it lets our opponents draw cards, but it's good because we're going to be playing multiple lands every turn, and we're going to be drawing multiple cards every turn, so I really like that. Soul Ring is Soul Ring, run Soul Ring. Zurin Orb, 0 mana artifact, sacrifice land, gain 2 life. Really great, like when we're in like a pinch or anything like that, if we need to gain life, or we just want to get lands into our graveyard, and play them later. But like, it's really nice when you can be like, yeah, I'll just sacrifice all of my lands and then I'll play like Splendid Reclamation and gain a ton of life, and oh, it's really, really good. Let's go to enchantments. War Shards, whenever a creature comes into play under your control, you may destroy target artifact or enchantment. We're like a pseudo token deck. We get a lot of cards, a lot of creatures. So this card says your opponents can have artifacts or enchantments is really, really good. Exploration just lets us play an additional land on our turn. And Feldar Retreat is really, really good for 2 reasons. Because it has 2 landfall triggers. We can either just straight up make a token, which is great, or put a 1/1 counter on all of our creatures and give them vigilance. So it's nice because if we don't have anything going on, we can just make a 2/2. Or if we have a lot going on, we can beef up the entire board and give them vigilance so like they can still block later. We have Retreat to Hagra. Don't really worry about the death touch part. It's not super relevant. Sometimes it can be, but it really isn't. but just draining our opponents every time we play a land is really, really good. Squandered Resources is a weird enchantment, but it basically lets us sacrifice a land to add 1 mana to our pool that land could produce. So the cool thing like this is, it's like a reverse Lotus Cobra, because it's like we can play a land, like we could like tap a land for mana and then sacrifice it, so it kind of lets us tap our lands for 2, and then we'll just play them later from our grave. And then Zendikar's Royal, kind of a pricier 5 mana card for effect, but whenever a land enters, we just make a 2/2. I like that. The big lands itself, we're going to run all the shocks. We are going to run all of the fetch lands. Here's the thing about that. I know that in Commander, you can run any color fetch land in any color deck because they don't have color identity. However, I think that's icky, and I think it kind of goes against what the spirit of it's trying to do. So I really only like running on color fetches in decks. I just like it a lot better. Let's go to the meat and cheese of the lands. We have Bojuka Bog to just exile a person's grave, which is good because we can tutor that up in a bunch of ways if we need it. We have Boseiju, a really cool card, because we can basically just channel it, get rid of something we don't like, and then play it later, or we can do effects like Life from the Loam that puts it back in our hand, and then we can do it again later and later. Command Beacon's really cool because Command Beacon says your commander never has command tags, because we're always just going to sacrifice it and put it in our hand. So our commander won't have command tags anymore. Command Tower, it just taps for 1 of any color and it enters untapped. It's an untapped Triumph. It's just good. I put these 2 cards together. I like to do alphabetical, but I put these 2 cards together because it makes sense. Dark Depths enters the battlefield with 10 ice counters on it. Remove an ice counter from Dark Deck for 3 mana, and then when it has no ice counters on it, we can sacrifice it, and if we do, make a legendary Merit Lodge 20/20 with flying and indestructible. Now the cool thing about Vesuva is you may have Vesuva enter the battlefield as a copy of any land on the battlefield. So the cool thing is when Vesuva enters, it's not going to get any of the ice counters that Dark Depths has. But when you can say, hey, I think I'd like Vesuva to be Dark Depths, right? Then you get a 20/20 just for free because it's going to have no counters on it, which I really like. Fabled Passage is basically a fetch land that only gets basics. But again, fetch land, nonetheless, it means we're always, like, it basically gives us 2 landfall triggers when we can play it from our grave. Fill the Dead, Tender's Tap for a colorless land. Oh, that's not good. But we can get a 2/2 every turn, pretty much, or every time we play a land, we'll just straight up get a 2/2, which is really good. Flagstones of Trokire, I never pronounced that out loud. I thought it was Tarkir, honestly, just until I've read that now. Doesn't matter. It's a legendary land. Actually, it wouldn't make sense in the lore. Why would I think that? Anyway, legendary land, taps for a plain or a white, but when it's put in the graveyard from the battlefield, search your library for a plains card, not a basic, but just a plains card, put it on the battlefield tapped. That's going to get our triumphs, that's going to get our shocks, and shuffle our library. Hey, a Triumph. It's a Triumph. Taps for any of our colors, and it's fetchable, and we can cycle it later if we don't want it. We have Strip Mine. We also are going to have Wasteland. These cards are basically in here to, when we can play multiple lands per turn, and we can play lands from our graveyard, we're going to go full on crazy psychopath mode, and we're going to start strip locking people. That means, strip locking means is you play your land for turn, it's Strip Mine, you sacrifice it, get rid of a land, right? You play it from your graveyard, or like, and then you get rid of it, destroy a target land again, and you do that over and over again. So you're basically not gaining anything from playing extra lands per turn, but you're really hurting your opponent. Takenuma is the same logic of Boseiju, where you can channel it to mill a couple, and then get a creature back from our creature or planeswalker from our grave back to our hand, and then we can play it later. But again, it's the same logic of Boseiju, where we can like loop it with like Life from the Loam and other types of effects like that. And the final 2 lands are Wasteland, which I talked about, and Yavi Maya, Cradle of Growth, which is basically just green Urborg. There's no combos with it, but it lets all of our lands, it basically fixes our colors. And it's nice. Basics, 6 forests, 4 plains, 5 swamps, and I hate that it's not centered, but I couldn't center it because it's just too dark to see. We are only running those 15 basics because we have a good amount that just straight up fetches non-basics, so we don't really need a ton of basics when we can get like non-basics through like Knight of the Reliquary, Elvish Reclaimer, crop rotation, cards like that that just give us whatever. We don't really need a ton of basics. The deck's about $770. A big chunk of this is the Gitrog monster is listing right now for $50, but as time goes on, the price will drop, and fetch lands are expensive. Just lands are expensive in general, so that's why it's so expensive. The average CMC is 3.34, and with the MTSCs, we have 41 lands, which is basically half the deck. Thank you guys for watching. Subscribe, comment what I do next, because I like making these decks, and I'd like to do your suggestions. And my throat is sore. I don't know if you can hear it, but a price to pay for letting you guys watch these videos. Whatever. I am tired. Well, guys, I will see you next time. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.